Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session on multiple future paths. I'm really honored to be here today with a powerhouse group of individuals who are really leading the way in thinking about career exploration 2.0. And I think taking into account not just that students need to understand what's possible in an ever-changing labor market and have their horizons expanded throughout their educational journeys, but also have that be a social and networked experience where they are actually meeting people who can inspire an array of future possible selves. So I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. I'm Julia Freeland Fisher. I'm the Director of Education Research at the Clayton Christensen Institute, and I'll be moderating this session. And I am going to ask of my colleagues that they actually do one extra thing when they introduce themselves. If you can tell us where you work and also share who helped you get where you are today briefly. Please spare us your autobiographies. That can be for another South by session. But I'll start with Jean Eddy.
Thanks, Julia. I'm Jean Eddy, President and CEO of American Student Assistance. Delighted to be here today. And I have thought a bit about Julia asking us that question. And I would say that I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Thank heavens someone else saw in me things that I might want to do. And that person was a faculty member, actually. And he saw things in me that basically pulled me into higher ed administration. Thought I would be good at it, and found out that as I was doing it over a bit of time that I absolutely fell in love with it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Shaun, I'm going to call on you next. When did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? Not to age you here. And who helped you get there?
Thanks, Julia. Shaun McAlmont. I'm the president of Career Learning at Stride Inc., which is formerly K-12. And when I was younger, I actually wanted to be an athlete. And I ended up growing up and becoming an athlete. I was an athlete in college, and I ran internationally in track and field. And lo and behold, my career ended when I was 23. So there you go. But I had a backup plan. And you take multiple assessments when you're younger in some cases. And I always wanted to help people. So I had a mentor who was actually an athletic coach. I had another one who was an educator, and one who was a business person. And I ended up advising student athletes, advising college students. I went on to manage advisors, got into the business of education. But the common denominator is I love helping people. And I think in all of those roles in education, we get to do that. So.
Wow, love it. Did not know you were such a Renaissance man. So I'm going to punt it over to David. Just a hard act to follow. But David, share a little bit about yourself.
I'm glad the segue wasn't, I'm going to punt it over to David, who is not a Renaissance man at all. I'm certainly not an athlete of Shaun's caliber, although I tried to play sports. But I never thought my career would go past college. But it's interesting for me, especially in this role as CEO of Mentor. I am just like the product of relationship privilege. I mean, I'm the product of white male privilege. I'm the product of relationship privilege. For me, there was never one person because there were so many people, and they were asking what do you want to do? What do you want to explore? And so I got to explore politics in Baltimore City growing up, which made me think a lot about, public service. I got to explore nonprofits, even though I more thought about how you amass money and power and be on the boards of nonprofits versus actually working in one, like I've dedicated my career to. But between the archetype of being an athlete, being the youngest of four, and just, being born lucky, there were always mentors around, and they were family and coaches and teachers and everybody. So very lucky.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And certainly, last but certainly not least, I should say, Sabari, share a little bit about where you work and how you figured out what you were going to be when you grew up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Julia. I'm Sabari Raja. I'm co-founder and CEO of Nepris. For me, I come from a very different background. I grew up on a rural farm, a coconut farm in South India, to parents without college degrees. So my exposure was very, very limited. Went to boarding school at the age of 5. So my view of the world was very limited. I did not know what I wanted to do, except that I wanted to get out of the farm and do something else. Right. So for me, I had one uncle in my family who was a very successful technology entrepreneur in Bangalore, India, which was the Silicon Valley of India. And the way my family looked at him and revered him and respected him, he became sort of the linchpin of success for me. So while I've had many mentors along the way, I think being having exposure to someone like my uncle, who was very successful in a field that was so far away from where I was born into, it just became something to aspire for. So I would say he was very much responsible in a very indirect way to motivate me to aspire for that.
Awesome. And Sabari, we're going to hear in a little bit what Nepris is and how I think it tries to scale connections to more literal and figurative uncles for more students. But I want to take a step back, knowing that South by Southwest is really, I think, focused on innovation and trying to rethink some of the core assumptions within our traditional education systems. Jean, I think there's a little bit of a myth I'd offer that that once you earn a diploma or a degree, then you get a job. But for the innovators in the audience, I think even just based on the stories we just heard from you guys, I think that it's dangerous to assume that degree getting and job getting are the same thing. And given that, right, given that we actually want students to graduate not just with a degree or diploma in hand, but also with a plan of what they're going to do to put that degree and diploma to work, when is the right time to actually start career exploration? What have you guys found in your work at ASA?
So I would say that our research at ASA, as well as the combined research of our partners, pretty much points to prime time for really interacting with a young person is when they're in middle school. They are curious. They don't have too many strongly formed opinions yet. They want to figure things out, and they really want to go exploring. I love the idea of working with a middle school student because they are open to the exploration. There's nothing quite like having a young person figure out what it is they love to do, what kind of skills they might need to do that, and then how that can intersect with some kind of career going forward. I tell my own children, if you can do what you love every day of the week, you never work a day in your life. And it is so true. So middle school, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that we know in the education research how pivotal middle school is on social dimensions and on academic ones. And I think this actually echoes a lot of those developmental milestones in terms of how a career trajectory might look. I'm curious, sort of, David, when you think about career exploration, you bring it to a totally different angle than the sort of education research lens or the pipeline lens, right? You are in the business, for lack of a better term, of relationships. And in the wake of COVID-19, you are hard pressed to find a single educator who would not say relationships matter, right? We've actually seen how deeply relationships matter for engagement. But I'm wondering if you think about relationships mattering for career exposure and career exploration, how does Mentor think about that relationship? How does Mentor think about relationships themselves as a predictor of future success and career success?
Yeah, so I don't know whether now is the time to pander to the moderator, but I could do that the whole time, because I think a lot of what you have said, which has married the world through Christensen, married education and relationship and mentoring and youth development, is that sort of this old adage, right, of we sort of get what we measure, right? And so we started becoming obsessed with measuring standardized tests. So if I'm a teacher, like, I could be the most loving, skilled teaching professional in the history of the world, I'm going to be really good at getting kids ready for a test. I mean, that's if you go to a good school or a high performing school, it's all the test. It's nothing else. It's not, you know, in a lot of places, it's not measured on a whole lot else. Obviously, in the private marketplace, you've got sort of like who will pay for it. But in the public marketplace, most of the rankings are based on that. And so, you know, we've often looked at relationship as a means to an end. I think the shift, and so that's how we try to get attention, right? In the mentoring field, we've said relationship will lead to attendance. Some of your school funding comes through attendance. Relationship will lead to doing better on the standardized test, because if kids' socio-emotional needs aren't met, then they won't do as well academically. So it's been relationship as the gateway to unlocking other things, to unlocking the career exposure that Jean just talked about so powerfully, to sort of occupational identity and what you think you can be. The question is, and will COVID-19 shift us in this or not? Is this our chance to hashtag build it back better? Will relationship be looked at as an end outcome? And that's what you've coined so well. Will we say that we judge a school by whether a kid graduates with a network of 8 people from the school and outside the school that she can say are her network. That would be a totally different definition of a successful school and a sense of what they want to do with their career, whether it be higher ed or so. I mean, I think it's redefining what school is. And I don't know whether the pandemic will cause that. I certainly hope so. I think what we've learned so far is basically the kids that we were least well serving before the pandemic were even less well serving now. And that has a lot to do with our ability to create connection and treat students like they have a whole contextual life and not just they're showing up to take standardized tests.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And for listeners, what David is very graciously alluding to is that I've done a lot of work on the role of social capital in accessing opportunities. So if we think about career exposure as a trajectory that hopefully, to Jean's point, starts in middle school with access to role models, for example, access to a variety of visions of your future possible self, the reality is those role models down the line or different individuals can turn into a network that actually makes it more likely you access a job, given that half of jobs come through personal connection. So I think that's to just connect what Jean was observing, and David, I think your push for social capital is an outcome in its own right. Shaun sort of quickly glossed over in his introduction. I want to clarify what Shaun does and then explain my question to you. So Shaun heads up Career Solutions at Stride Inc., which is formerly K-12 Inc. for context. So really thinking about career exposure and experience. I want to sort of delineate those two at scale. And I think, Shaun, at conferences like these, there's like this big bundle of like career readiness. I have a personal mission to call it career optionality instead of readiness from an equity lens. But I think there's some fear that targeted career technical education programs can devolve into tracking students rather than expanding their horizons, rather than, again, I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of many future possible selves, athlete or education corporate executive, right, in your case. So what are the best approaches or tools that you're seeing to help young people see a broad array of career paths, and maybe share best practices either from Stride, or you guys have so many partnerships in the space, others doing exciting work?
Yeah, it's a great question, Julia. First of all, we changed our name to Stride because we really feel that the career continuum, if you will, starts maybe even earlier than middle school. In our view, now we're with Jean. We have an intense middle school exploration program, but I think many schools are starting to look at what are K through 5 skill sets that really relate to career development and career confidence down the road. And then we've recently acquired 3 adult training companies, Galvanize, MedCerts, and Tech Elevator, which are IT and allied healthcare training institutions. And so we want to make sure that students anywhere in that continuum have a view of multiple paths toward career success. So we do that in a couple of ways. Now, we have Sabari with us today, and we are really honored to have her as a business partner. Many of our students are on the Nepris platform talking to industry professionals. And we actually start students talking to industry professionals, working in virtual teams in middle school without a distinct career pathway, so that they can be introduced to project-based learning, working in virtual teams, working with collaborative software tools, et cetera, which we feel are just foundational elements of a sort of modern work environment. So if they can start gaining that type of broad career experience early on, by the time they figure out a pathway or decide to, explore post-high school graduation pathway, they've got a set of skills that can help them actually look at multiple ways of moving past high school. So we are all about optionality as well. If a student can think about themselves in terms of a pathway that's not linear anymore. It could sort of be circuitous. It could go through multiple layers of education, but the end goal is this continual development of those early skills they gained in their experience with us. And by the time that they've gone post-graduation, they might decide to work while they're going to school. They might decide to go to technical training and then work, or go to work and have their employer pay for their 4-year education. There are so many different options. So not just by industry, but also by route. And so, Julia, I think you're 100% right. If we can expose them to those options early on, we feel that their ability to gain career confidence is accelerated. And by the way, we found that you can do that virtually in many ways. And I'll just give you a quick example. We love Shabri's platform at Nepris because it's a direct tie to industry professionals. But we also launched a job shadow week, where we gave students an opportunity to rotate through sessions with multiple companies. And they might not be interested in any, they might be interested in multiple, but they got to ask questions of those industry professionals in a way that is sort of a round robin, just learn. You don't have to engage with one or the other. And so many opportunities to do that along the way for not only Stride, but many other education institutions.
Yeah, Shaun, I want to just pull on one strand there, and then Sabari will come over to you to talk about the power of technology to do all these wonderful things that we've been framing up to date. But I think, Shaun, your push on it's not linear is a core message for the career exposure and exploration space, because it's very tempting from a sort of top-down standpoint to want to just have a perfect line beginning to end of where a student starts and where that student ends up. And yet all of our stories that we shared, I think, didn't reflect that. And so the question maybe for the next 10, 15 minutes, I want all the panelists to keep in mind is like, how do you systematize a nonlinear system, a nonlinear journey? Because I think that's the challenge if we're really going to make this a student-centered kind of approach to career exposure and exploration. So Sabari, I have a specific question for you in light of COVID a little bit, but I think what your story illustrated, right, is the power of one individual to shift your mindset, almost regardless of your circumstances, or in your case, sort of in spite of your circumstances, the role that your uncle and I know others in your life were willing to play. And I think this year in particular, those sparks or those relationships were really out of reach for a lot of students, just because they weren't able to come to school. You and I know that's not a new problem though. So I'm curious to hear about how you're thinking about using technology to reach more students with more access to sort of career exposure. And maybe you could just give the audience a quick summary of what the heck Nepris is, because we've all been not giving it a nod.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Julia. So basically, Nepris was founded with the mission to bring equity of access using technology to bridge the gap between industry and education. So the goal has always been, how do we use a technology solution to connect thousands of students, irrespective of where they live and who they are, to opportunities from around the country and around the world. So that's basically what we do. We sit in the middle of educators and industry professionals and make this connection really possible and accessible to every single classroom, no matter where they are. A large percentage of our users are rural schools. Like last year, post-COVID, we've seen an increase in rural school districts really reaching out for access. I mean, one good example is the Arkansas Department of Education. They launched Nepris for over 285 of their small rural school districts, because they realized even more so post-COVID that access is so important. So your other question, Julia, really where I believe you can really expand the student horizons is, you say this very well in your book, Who You Know. It's how do we connect more students to more people across the world and across the country. It's the weak tie opportunities, while, I myself am grateful for having mentors who've helped me along the way. When we are especially talking about going to younger and younger grade levels, we actually have a very high usage in elementary, surprisingly, that at those points, it's about how do you integrate. We don't want to look at career exposure as something that happens once a year during career days. How we want to change perspective is this should be part of your day-to-day teaching and learning. For that, you need a technology platform to make that happen. You need to start thinking about, if I am teaching, solar power in my 4th grade elementary classroom, my kids are working on a solar powered cooker, how can I connect them with a renewable energy expert? It's not only bringing relevance to learning, but in the process, bringing exposure. That's what we've been focused on. We don't look at career exposure as a separate standalone thing that happens somewhere on the side, but for really a scalable change to happen, to really make impact on influencing students at a large scale level, it needs to be integrated into your day-to-day classroom. And that can only happen through many, many week-tie connections that is tied to what they're learning in the classroom. It's not just your STEM classes. It's not just math and science. If you're in a social studies classroom, if you're in an ELA classroom, how can you connect with the children's book author? If you're in a social studies classroom, how can you connect with people who are working in that field? You want to connect with maybe people in public service and government. So that's the kind of change we're looking at. And that's how the schools have to shift their mentality. And technology can play a huge role in bringing that kind of scale. Week-tie connections are the first step to career exposure, which can eventually, as they grow older, lead into more stronger one-on-one connections.
Awesome. Thanks, Sabari. I mean, I'll editorialize right now as the moderator. I'm not supposed to do this, but I do think that as we look post-COVID, now that the vaccine is in sight, and I think there's inevitable conversations about what's going to remain in place when schools go quote unquote back to normal. Everything Sabari is talking about is what we've seen in our research is the competitive advantage of tech, which is to diversify weak-tie connections, not to replace high-touch mentoring connections. And if, depending on where audience members are sort of in the pipeline, if you're trying to get someone a job in a very particular industry, you need strong ties and mentors. If you're trying, as Jean so aptly pointed out, to expand horizons and sense of possibility, you need a bunch of weak ties. So I think everything you're saying, I hope, has some staying power. Let's stick with technology for a second. Jean, I want to go back to you. ASA has produced a tool called Futurescape that I think is really designed to help students meet students where they are at, I should say, and then see what is possible. Can you just talk a little bit about what that tool is and how students have started to access it to date?
Certainly. So last May we launched, and certainly this was in development prior to COVID, but I think about it in the event of COVID, that we were trying to bring career exploration and exploration of one's talents and abilities to kids where they are, as you put it. We designed it through a mobile device rather than on a platform with a PC or a Mac, because we know that about 94% of kids within our demographic use cell phones. They have access to cell phones and they use them. So we decided to go out and work with kids where they are and give them an opportunity to go career exploring. And I would have to say it's really fun. So I can encourage, everybody should try it. Go to Futurescape at asa.org to really get a sense of its gameplay initially, to discover talents and interests, and then it opens up a universe of possibilities for people to go and see, young people to see those skills and abilities, how they could interact or intersect with a given career path. And it doesn't have to be one, it's multiples of a career path. If you like math or if you like science, you can go in a myriad of directions. And then from there, you start to learn more about what those careers are, the kind of education you might need, and to follow on to being a Nepris fan. You also get an opportunity to go out and see what people in the field actually do if they want to be an astrophysicist, as an example. They also have access to mentors, because we have a relationship with the mentor organization to be able to go and talk to someone to really kind of think through what that might happen to be. What has been very, very heartening about this is that not only have we had over 3 million young people go onto this platform since May, but we have kids using this platform from every state in the union, every single one. And it's not a case of kids in a certain demographic use it, everybody's using it. I would have to say, with a smile on my face, young women seem to like it more than young men, but that's our challenge to solve.
That's for 2021, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so check out Futurescape, and maybe given the partnership, David, that Jean mentioned, I think that anytime I talk to people about career access and exploration, the power of mentors comes up. But you and I have also talked about the fact that mentor is a very loaded word, and it can mean many things. So curious, amidst this pandemic, as you look at your affiliates in the space, maybe those that are partnering with Futurescape and others, what's working? What's working in a digital capacity that might actually outlast COVID-19, particularly when it comes to putting more career mentors and role models in reach for more young people?
Yeah, so I first want to say that, Futurescape just sort of ASA exhibited Futurescape at the National Mentoring Summit. And I think often Sabari and I were actually discussing this a little bit in our prep call. Mentoring and sort of like these tech tools and weak ties get pitted against each other as a zero-sum game. When you actually talk to people in the field, they're looking for complementary tools. So like the mentoring people were psyched about Futurescape because they can leverage that. Mentors can't be all things to all kids. They don't know everything a kid wants to do. So I think when we can pair technology tools with human connection, like lots of really cool things can happen is what I would say. I also do, just to be dark for a second, I know you asked me for solutions, but I also want to be a realist about the way this pandemic magnifies inequity, because we could end up being people who sit around and say that disruption and innovation is going to solve for racial injustice and inequity. And the bottom line is, when we go out to mentoring programs who are doing a great job trying to maintain connection, the digital divide and the access to devices is a huge issue, as is literacy. People used to always come to me and say, like, I can solve the mentoring gap with an app. Well, there's a lot of kids that don't have access, and also just writing back and forth to a human may not be something they're totally confident in. So I think the idea here is about orientation and rigor. That's all it's about. It's about orientation, rigor, and intentionality. There are tools that will work for solving for different things. And I think all the panelists have talked about, like, just making sure that the tool is proportional to the issue and that it solves a part of the problem. I think there's also a design challenge, and that's something ASA is helping us with, which is actually doing design engagements with schools to say, so you want to be a relationship-centered district, which, there are models out there that you've highlighted, like Summit and Big Picture and others, who are not sort of public districts, but have shown as network schools how to put relationship in the center and make that an outcome of success. So I think I just would say, again, complementary, virtual and in person, and mentoring organizations are having to learn that. What once was sort of like a threat or second class is like, I've got to hybrid this and find new tools like Nepris and Futurescape and everything. I think we've got to design with intention and rigor, and proportionality. And then I still think we have structural inequities that make this like not easy to solve with any one thing, because the funding in a school, the digital divide, these are all implications that make it easier said than done for people to take these tools, take this design, and actually, use them if you're under amazing pressure in a school district. I would just add, I think advocacy is huge too. And while we're about to invest a lot of money hopefully through a recovery package in education, the question will be, what will that get used for? And we all have a role to play in seeing how that's actually deployed.
Yeah, I mean, just two strands there, David. I think rebranding hybrid as the sort of best of both worlds might be a task to surmount post-pandemic, but it's the real opportunity if you combine high touch, high tech, high touch. There's a bunch of permutations of that to pay attention to. And I think also important, just David's being a little bit modest, but he and his colleague Liz Santiago have been creating with ASA's partnership an entire sort of set of pilots and designs around relationship-centered schools that, to my point about systematizing this, I think will be a huge contribution to the field over the year to come. Shaun, I just want you to get in here as someone who has a bird's eye view of this market and sort of scaling solutions. I want to talk about alignment a little bit, aligning students' strengths and interests, because if we get too broad with this notion of career exploration, we're like replicating the internet and just sort of say, okay, just go explore everything in the world without coherence. So how do you at Stride think about aligning to what students may be interested in or discovering they're interested in, and then sort of putting skills and knowledge around those interests? Oh, you're muted.
It's a great question and great, just as great a challenge. But I do feel that, you know, I go back to this concept of building confidence along the way. We learn a lot about the students and their interests, you know, every step of the way. And if we can look at incremental development toward career interest, we end up finding that alignment happens sort of on its own. But we also put a lot of resources around the multitude of interests that can come. And that's why we keep looking at new acquisitions, content that we can bring from industry professionals and industry training to the high school level, et cetera. So it's just giving them more option, more access to that type of content.
Awesome. Yeah, I do think it's a sort of puzzle of bringing together diverse content and then matching those to pathways. We're almost at time, so I'm going to end us with a lightning round here. You know, you have my panelists we have in front of us in the South by audience, entrepreneurs, innovators, funders, disruptors who David may not be fond of, but are trying to disrupt everything, and leaders and educators in our system who I think are trying their best to reach all students right now to expand their sense of what's possible in their future. So lightning round is, for anyone trying to expand career exposure and opportunities, what's one big takeaway? Sabari, I'll start with you. Jean, you're up next, just to give you a heads up.
Absolutely, Julia. I mean, we all know that while skills and social capital are equally important, but the foundation of building students for future of work is the occupational identity. What they believe they can be, they cannot believe in anything if they don't know what exists out there. So exposing students to a wide range of possibilities, diverse people, role models, places, workplace experiences, it's going to be so important. And this work cannot be done at scale without the help of technology and virtual. Post-COVID, I think this has become even more important. So,
Jean?
I will agree with everything that Sabari just said. I would just add, please, let's start earlier. Let's start early in middle school.
Shaun?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic has shown us that just like we're working here and operating in a virtual environment, young people can as well. And they're developing some amazing technical skills that we hope will actually last them a lifetime and prepare them for a modern workplace. So although it's been challenging, I think they're developing some underlying skills that will really benefit them long term.
David, take us home.
Yeah, I would just say it's impossible to sum up this all-star crew, but I would just say pair, exposure, connection, and opportunity. We can do all three. They don't work without each other. They're not competitors. Pair all three and redefine what educational success is. If we start there, I think we can build a better system.
I could not have said it better myself, David. I want to share with all the participants in this session, all our audience members, that ASA has a booth that you can go visit that actually has a whole bunch of resources that all of us pulled ahead of this session. So go there, check out tools, research, books, and other web resources that might be useful for you guys to put all these ideas into action in your context. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.